Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the latest stack of research and distill it into the crucial, need-to-know insights for you. Today, we are wrestling with a domain where the stakes are, well, absolute. Artificial intelligence moving rapidly into healthcare.
It really is the ultimate test case for governing these automated systems because, like you said, the decisions being made, or maybe influenced, are literally life and death.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a really powerful set of sources for this deep dive today. They range from, global ethical standards set by the World Health Organization, the WHO, all the way to practical domestic policy like the U.S. blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights.
Yeah, and our mission here isn't just to list off the rules, right? It's to get a clear, structured understanding of the whole regulatory landscape, and maybe more importantly, to look at the real-world ethical dilemmas popping up right now in clinics, in hospitals.
Exactly. That synthesis is key. The central conflict, I think, that we need to unpack is this. These automated systems, they've brought incredible benefits, things like identifying diseases faster, speeding up drug development.
Huge potential.
Absolutely. But the speed things are moving, if it's not checked, it directly threatens some really fundamental human rights. We're talking patient safety, equity in care, and privacy.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start with that foundation. When we talk about governance, what sort of principles are these global bodies and governments actually using to manage this immense power? Maybe we start with the global view, the WHO's 6 core ethical principles from 2021. This isn't just old school medical ethics anymore, is it?
No, not at all. Far from it. The WHO really had to bridge that gap between, human medical practice and machine learning. They start, maybe predictably, with the traditional duties. Non-maleficence, basically, avoid harming others, do no harm, and beneficence, promoting well-being and maximizing the benefits for patients.
Right, the Hippocratic Oath, essentially, but for code.
Kind of, yeah, applied to code. But it's the next set of principles where you really start to see the tension with modern AI, particularly the technical side of things. So we move straight into transparency and explainability. The WHO is pretty insistent that these systems have to be intelligible. Understandable, basically. To the developers, yes, but also to the medical professionals using them, and even to the patients themselves.
Right, and that's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it?
It really is.
Because, hang on, is that even fully possible with something like deep learning? I mean, aren't many of the most powerful diagnostic AIs essentially black boxes by design?
Yeah.
Is the WHO maybe setting an impossible standard here just for the sake of ethical purity?
It's a huge challenge, a profound one. And the WHO does acknowledge how difficult this is. The principle isn't necessarily about, understanding every single line of code.
Okay.
It's more about understanding the logic, the inputs that went in, what the limits of the AI's inference are. Because if we can't grasp why an AI suggested a certain diagnosis,
Then accountability goes out the window.
exactly, we can't meet that other principle. Responsibility and accountability. That requires clear human stakeholders who can actually be held liable if something goes wrong, if there are adverse effects.
Which then connects to the more social side, right? Like
Yeah.
autonomy, respecting the patient's right to make their own decisions, and maybe most critically, justice and fairness, making sure no person or group faces discrimination.
Yeah, and fairness is possibly the most vulnerable principle here, as I think we'll get into later. But these 6 pillars together, they really set that global high bar. Now, if we shift to the domestic view, like the U.S. Office of Science and Technology Policy's blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, we can see how they try to translate these big ideals into more concrete regulatory checkpoints.
The blueprint feels, I don't know, more focused on mandatory steps, operational procedures to protect the patient on the ground.
Exactly right. They demand safe and effective systems. And this is where they push beyond just initial testing. It's not enough to test it once. These systems have to undergo pre-deployment testing and be subject to rigorous ongoing monitoring in the real world.
So watch it constantly.
Constantly. And if the performance slips or if bias starts creeping in during use, the regulation explicitly says that the potential outcomes include not deploying the system in the first place or even mandating its immediate removal from clinical use.
They also seem pretty fed up with the way digital consent works now, which feels especially weak when you're talking about sensitive areas like health.
Oh, massively fed up.
Wow.
The blueprint calls for much stronger protections for data privacy. It specifically notes that any data collection has to conform to reasonable expectations,
Meaning
you should only collect what's strictly necessary for the specific purpose you described. And the consent process itself needs a complete overhaul. Move away from those long incomprehensible legal notices nobody reads.
Yeah, the endless pages of terms and conditions.
Right. Instead, consent requests need to be brief, written, plain language, and specific to the use case. No more of these blanket waivals that, let's be honest, currently protect the companies more than the patient.
Okay, but before we get totally bogged down in just the rules and regulations, let's pivot a bit. Let's look at why everyone's pushing so hard to get this tech out there. What are the immediate, maybe even transformative wins AI is delivering right now that make this whole debate so urgent?
Yeah, the benefits, particularly in augmenting what humans do, are pretty staggering.
Mhm.
In clinical care, AI is already showing really powerful performance in diagnosis support. Think about radiological diagnosis oncology, mammography, but also non-radiological stuff like pathology and dermatology.
Right, we've seen those reports where for specific narrow tasks, these deep learning models are matching or sometimes even doing better than human experts when interpreting medical images.
That's exactly right. It offers powerful second opinions or maybe first reads, freeing up specialists' time. And beyond just diagnostics, think about how it's accelerating drug development. We've got that huge breakthrough from DeepMind, AlphaFold,
Ah, yes, Alpha
which
Lab.
can reliably predict the really complex three-dimensional shape of a protein.
Okay, for those of us who aren't biologists, maybe quickly, why is predicting protein folding so important? Why is that such a revolutionary thing?
Sure. So the 3D structure of a protein basically dictates what it does, its function in the body. Historically, figuring out that structure took years, sometimes decades, of really painstaking lab work.
Right.
AlphaFold, by predicting how the protein folds into its shape computationally, it just drastically cuts down the time and the cost needed for that initial step in drug discovery, figuring out what you're targeting. This speeds up not just creating brand new medicines, but also figuring out if existing drugs could be repurposed for completely different diseases.
So AI isn't just about, say, better diagnoses or outcomes. It's also about efficiency, maybe even improving the human side of the care experience.
Precisely. The WHO points this out too.
Yeah.
By automating some of the administrative burden, helping providers avoid simple errors, AI can let clinicians shift their focus. Instead of being buried in paperwork and clicking boxes,
Which they hate.
which they absolutely hate,
Yeah.
they can spend more time actually providing care, listening to patients, addressing their fears. That shift back toward human connection, that could be one of the biggest wins for both patient outcomes and, frankly, clinician morale.
And that efficiency gain is also pushing care outside the traditional hospital walls, right? More into the home with remote monitoring.
Correct. Telemedicine, remote monitoring, these are heavily boosted by AI analyzing all the data streams coming from wearables, for example. By 2025, the projection is something like 1.5 billion wearable units might be purchased every year, which creates huge opportunities to monitor health continuously, capture data way more efficiently, maybe detect health risks earlier, manage chronic conditions better, all without needing constant, expensive clinic visits.
Okay, so the promise is definitely there. Huge potential. But now, the peril.
Yes, and what's fascinating and frankly pretty concerning is how quickly the systemic flaws, the biases that already exist in human society, get encoded, scaled up, and amplified by these very systems. The promise of efficiency comes sort of packaged with significant ethical peril.
And the most concrete peril, which ties right back to that WHO principle of justice we mentioned, is algorithmic discrimination. It's not theoretical.
No, not at all. We have a landmark case, a really horrifying one actually, that shows exactly how this plays out. There was a widely used healthcare algorithm designed to help manage population health. Its job was basically to flag which patients needed extra proactive care management.
Okay, seems reasonable. So what was the mechanism of failure? How did this algorithm decide who was sicker or needed more attention?
Well, this is the crucial part. It used the cost of a patient's past healthcare as a proxy, as a stand-in, for predicting their future health needs. The underlying assumption was higher cost history equals higher need.
Ah, I think I see where this is going.
Exactly. Because the U.S. healthcare system historically, for various complex reasons, spends less on black patients compared to white patients, even when they have similar levels of medical need. The AI took that lower cost history for black patients and wrongly interpreted it as them being less sick.
So the algorithm, using what looks like objective, clean math, was essentially just replicating and amplifying historical, socioeconomic, and racial bias baked into the healthcare spending data.
Precisely. And the result was this racial bias drastically cut the number of black patients identified as needing that extra proactive care by more than half. The underlying societal bias wasn't fixed by the tech. It was laundered, accelerated, and hidden inside what looked like an objective algorithm.
Which makes those black box systems the ones where even the developers can't fully explain the decision path even more dangerous, right? You can't even interrogate the system's logic. How can you possibly find and fix that kind of bias?
You can't,
Hmm.
really. And that leads directly into another crisis. The crisis of professional autonomy for doctors.
Yeah.
If clinicians are being asked to act on recommendations from an AI that they don't fully understand, or that they can't explain properly to their patient,
It undermines their own
it
judgment.
undermines their core responsibility, yeah. And it also erodes patient autonomy because the patient might not understand where the recommendation came from, and they certainly won't feel empowered to challenge the technology effectively.
And that loss of control, that lack of understanding, it seems to extend beyond the clinic too, especially with all these convenient home health gadgets and, the rise of what the sources call biosurveillance.
Yes, the WHO points specifically to the explosion of consumer products, things like mental health chatbots, digital self-management apps for chronic conditions. These often fall into a kind of gray zone.
Meaning,
Meaning, are they regulated medical devices subject to rigorous testing? Or are they just unregulated wellness applications you download from an app store? If patients start relying heavily on these unregulated tools for what feels like clinical advice, maybe instead of talking to their doctor, the risk of serious errors goes up dramatically.
and all the data being collected by these things, the wearables, the apps, the constant monitoring that raises huge flags about where that data might end up, doesn't it? Data repurposing.
Absolutely. The expansion of biosurveillance, and this includes not just heart rate from your watch, but potentially biometric data like facial features, fingerprints collected through health apps. It raises serious concerns about health data being used for totally non-health purposes.
Like what?
Well, could this data, collected ostensibly for health monitoring, be repurposed later for use by law enforcement or immigration authorities or insurance companies in ways the user never envisioned or consented to? The potential for that kind of mission creep is immense once the data is out there. And related to this, we also just can't forget the digital divide issue. There's a real risk that all this techno-optimism, this excitement about AI health, just ends up making existing inequalities worse.
How so?
Well, the WHO cites figures, for instance, that globally there are about 327 million fewer women than men in low and middle income countries who even use mobile internet. So the very populations who might stand to benefit the most from some of these new AI-enabled health services could be effectively locked out from the start, just widening the health equity gap.
Okay, so we have this promise, but these really serious perils, bias, loss of autonomy, privacy risks, inequity. What does this all mean for accountability? If these systems are already failing in such concrete, predictable, and harmful ways, like that racial bias example you gave, what actual guardrails are being put in place to ensure trust and, importantly, to guarantee some kind of remedy when things go wrong?
This is where the OSTP blueprint really tries to get specific. It includes a principle on human alternatives, consideration, and fallback. And this is critical. It states that when fundamental rights, opportunities, or access are meaningfully at stake, which, let's face it, is always the case in healthcare, the public must have guaranteed access to timely human consideration and remedy if an automated system fails, makes an error, or if they simply want to appeal its decision.
And the sources provide a really chilling anecdote, don't they? It perfectly illustrates why that human fallback needs to be mandatory, not just optional. It's not just about building a good system. You have to build a system where humans feel empowered, even obligated to override it when necessary.
That example is truly haunting. It involved a patient who was wrongly denied pain medication while in the hospital. Why? Because the hospital software somehow confused her medical history with the medication records of her dog.
Her dog.
Seriously.
Seriously. The system flagged the pain medication request as suspicious because of this data mix-up.
Yeah.
But here's the really disturbing part. Even after the patient figured out the source of the error, traced it back to the wrong electronic file being linked, the human doctors were apparently afraid to override the system's flag.
Afraid? Why?
Fear of liability, maybe? Fear of going against the standard procedure dictated by the software? Whatever the reason, they hesitated, and the patient was forced to go without pain relief because the humans deferred to the faulty machine.
So the real failure there wasn't just the software bug, which happens. It was the failure of human oversight. The system became the dictator, not the tool. Exactly. The human professionals failed because, in that instance, they feared the machine, or the protocol around it, more than they upheld their direct duty of care to the suffering patient. The blueprint is essentially demanding that these human oversight mechanisms aren't just theoretical. They have to be accessible, equitable, and effective in practice. The goal is ensuring the AI augments human care. It doesn't dictate it blindly. And this whole accountability question gets even murkier when you start looking at public-private partnerships, PPPs, which are increasingly common in developing AI health tools.
Right, where maybe a hospital system partners with a tech company.
Precisely. Now, the private sector companies involved clearly have a responsibility to respect human rights, same as anyone. But often, the chain of accountability, who is responsible for what, especially when data is shared, becomes incredibly opaque.
And that lack of transparency, as the sources point out, is actively damaging public trust, which is essential for any of this to work.
It absolutely is.
Hmm.
We have documented examples where major respected health systems, the medicals have mentioned, shared large amounts of de-identified patient data with tech companies to help them develop commercial AI products.
Okay.
But critically, they apparently failed to notify the patients whose data was being used or to fully disclose the financial terms of these agreements with the tech companies. When the public feels like their data is being used or sold behind their backs, even if it's de-identified, you instantly erode the trust that's absolutely necessary for people to embrace AI in their healthcare. That principle of responsibility and accountability has to apply clearly and transparently to all the players in these partnerships, public and private.
So this deep dive really reinforces that delicate balance we started talking about. The potential of AI in healthcare is undeniably immense. It can save time, it could accelerate cures, it can improve diagnoses. But whether it actually succeeds or fails seems to depend entirely on the wisdom we apply to governing it and the strength of these ethical and legal guardrails we put in place.
And making those guardrails work requires making some hard ethical choices. For instance, if there's a trade-off, and sometimes there might be, between having full transparency, knowing exactly how an AI reached its conclusion, versus achieving the absolute maximum diagnostic accuracy, which do you prioritize? Some policymakers and ethicists argue that transparency should maybe take precedence, precisely to ensure trust and maintain accountability, even if it means sacrificing a tiny bit of accuracy in some cases.
That's a tough call.
It is.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think the consensus emerging from these sources is that for AI to truly succeed and be accepted in healthcare, it absolutely must be used to augment human capacity, to enhance medical judgment, not to replace it wholesale or to erode those core patient rights we've been discussing.
Which brings us to the final provocative thought for you, our listeners, raised by the source material. The WHO makes a really interesting point. Almost all the underlying science, including the AI technology itself, is built on decades of publicly funded academic research. And often, these systems are trained on vast amounts of patient data collected through public health systems or initiatives. So when new AI products and services developed using this public foundation of research and data are then heavily protected by private patents and intellectual property rights, generating significant profits. What precise obligations, financial, social, ethical, does the private sector owe back to the citizens who contributed the data and funded the fundamental research that made it all possible in the first place? Something to think about. Thank you for listening to The Deep Dive.